It was supposed to be a simple, fun overnighter. But for some of us, the trip to Deer Hollow Recreation Area near our home in Cedar City turned into a rough situation and temperatures well below freezing. What happened? What did we learn? Find out on this episode of the Live Ultralight podcast, powered by Outdoor Vitals. This podcast is all about inspiring you to get outdoors, showing you how to lighten your pack and build your confidence so you can start living your life full of adventure. I am Joe.
I'm Tayson.
Tyler.
Brigham.
I'm Derek.
And we went on a work trip to Deer Hollow Recreation Area. Whose idea was it to go up there?
I think it was I don't know whose specifically it was, but we did a cross-country ski trip last year that was well enjoyed by a few of us, and so we've been planning on doing that again, and that makes the most sense since that's designated for cross-country skiing. Versus last time, it was a bit rough. We were going through powder, and tipping over in powder is a tough thing to come back from on skis when you're new.
Yeah, I think between Brigham and I, we've been up at Deer Hollow a number of times, and so we kind of both fed off each other's enthusiasm for that place. So I do still think it was, as far as the skiing portion goes, funner than last year's ski trip.
It was.
I thought it was collectively decided, and the ultimate approval was left up to Joe, which he met with much enthusiasm and said, "Yeah, let's do it." Isn't that what happened?
You were egging us on to go, right?
I don't remember any of that, but no, Brigham, you went there like a couple days before, right?
The week previous.
Oh,
yeah,
the week previous?
I kind of just did like a little pre-run of the route.
Okay. And did it just turn out the way you expected, I guess?
The route was still there when we were there the next week.
All right. Who wants to describe what this area is?
I can do that. So
Okay.
Deer Hollow, it's at the very top of the mountain right here by Cedar. And what they do is it's a national recreation area. So the Forest Service actually goes in and grooms trails for day use. So if you want to have a packed-in trail to go snowshoeing on, which kind of defeats the purpose of snowshoeing, you can do that, or you can just ski on. There's different types of cross-country or winter skis. You can go there and do that for free, basically, and it's maintained by the Forest Service.
And volunteers.
And and groups of volunteers will go and help take care of all this. And so ultimately it just makes cross-country skiing a lot easier when you're not trying to forge your own trail through a bunch of powder. There's a lot of snow up there, like I said, because it's at the top, so having it packed in was just nice. It covered a lot of miles, actually, on these trails. There's a big trail system that they groom, actually, in kind of the woods up there, so you can go quite a few different directions. But it's kind of you can spend all day and have a great time up there.
Yeah, so I had been cross-country skiing for the first time when I was a teenager, and that was also the last time that I had gone cross-country skiing. What was it about the trip last year that made you want to do it again?
So that was my first time ever being on cross-country skis was last year, and there were moments of joy and goodness, and it was like, man, if we weren't like doing this the wrong way per se, this could be a great time. It seems way more efficient than snowshoes. You get a little bit of enjoyment out of skiing down the hills. So just kind of more fun and more efficient than snowshoes. So I think that kind of drove us. We learned from last year, especially being a little bit more on the beginner side, that pushing Nordic long skinny skis through a lot of powder is kind of rough. And without skins, it's really hard to go up hills. And so it's like, man, if we had gone on in an area that was designated for this would be nothing but efficient and fun. So I wanted to give it a shot for sure in like a scenario where most people are cross-country skiing and see what the difference is versus paving our own way.
Yeah. So Derek rented the skis, right? Mm-hmm. And for the most part, we all went and trekked in there with the boots that they had given us, the skis they had given us, and we went only 3 miles in? How far in would we go?
Yeah, it was about that.
About 3 miles, and then kind of camped a little off trail. And that's where the fun, I think, really started.
No, that's where it ended.
Well, see, in this podcast episode, you're probably going to hear it over and over again, but it's all of us against Joe. We loved it, and Joe has just been anti from the start. So we're gonna gang up on him again because I think he's absolutely wrong.
We won't let him hold the mic hostage on this one.
In all transparency, we had to film a whole bunch of videos, and because I hadn't been skiing since I was a teenager, I was concerned from the get-go about filming a whole bunch of videos while on skis. I'd been concerned about that. That turned out to be okay. We made it through that stuff just fine, in a way.
You didn't even crash on the way in.
Yeah, you didn't crash.
On the way in, I managed not to crash. On the way out the next day, I did crash about 6 times, and there was no one around me, but I've definitely sworn the most I've ever sworn at work.
But in defense of cross-country skiing, when you crashed those 6 times, you were not filming. So it wasn't because of the filming. That was just
true.
because you were skiing. So
My question
I will
is,
still say that doesn't quite play in for the filming part.
how many of the YouTube videos that I sent you did you watch?
I watched the one.
Okay.
Didn't you only send me one?
I sent you a couple.
Okay. I only watched the one where
As long as you watched them.
you put your feet in a V shape.
So what? You're, I mean,
I don't even know what that
you
means.
couldn't learn how to cross country ski by watching a couple of videos.
I
What's
did.
the matter with you?
I was a professional actor.
Well, going flat or uphill, it was basically just like walking. But then downhill, it was terrifying. That's not for me. I can't be on a skateboard. I can't be on skis going downhill. Just nothing like that. Where I'm on top of something I can't control.
Did you get in the slots when you went down the hills?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Awful.
I was gonna say because that I did that at night. Well, I don't.
See, he said the tracks were awful.
No. The experience was awful. The tracks were smooth, I guess. Too smooth. I was going too fast. It was freaking me out.
We'll get to it, but compare that to what we did last year. We were skiing down this road, and the wind had blown so hard that it blew all the snow off the road, and it was just ice. That was awful.
Those downhill parts actually were pretty sketchy because you never knew if you were gonna like run out of snow and just all of a sudden be on like blacktop.
Yep.
And then wipe out and
ice.
hit your head on blacktop or ice or 2 feet of snow. It was
So this year was just
Bliss.
piece of cake and so smooth and easy for, if we're comparing it to last year's trip at least.
Yeah.
really nice trail system.
Last year, all 3 of us that went had a moment of falling down, and mine. I don't think I struggled as much to get up, but Derek, he got snow. He took a 30-minute break trying to get his skis back on because the powder packed into his binding.
Last year, the
I fell
second
on
day,
the ice, and
the ice had like frozen into the binding on my skis, and so I had such a hard time getting my boot back in that next day, and just chipping away at it, trying to figure out how to get my boot to stick in the binding. So
I think everyone on this trip had an amazing time skiing. Even Maddie, she fell once because of Derek, and
that's
other
true.
than that, it was just Joe and the rest of us had a phenomenal ski trip.
For everyone listening here, there was also Joe's at least been before. My wife Maddie, she's never been winter backpacking, but she's also never been cross country skiing. We've gone on a lot of other backpacking trips and different activities, but this is the first time for the winter camping and the cross country skiing, and she did great. And I will say that, like, for her first experience, I think that was a great trip.
Yeah. Well,
Okay. I actually think the skiing was fine. It was fine. I'm being curmudgeonly, but I did. It was fine. It was the skiing thing was fine. Skiing out, I was pretty frustrated, mostly because of the night before, no sleep, and then I was trying to get back to the car as fast as possible, and maybe that's why I wrecked a few times on the way there. Maybe I was just hurrying too much, except for the one hill where I tried to slow down and I couldn't. And I still don't understand the video's instructions that Tyler gave me, where he's like, you put your feet out in a V or something like that to slow yourself down. I had no idea what that was or how to do that. or really how to like control the skis. I saw this like, I guess you guys probably ran into the same couple the next day when we were going out, and they're just flying. I have no idea what they're doing with their feet.
They're on a different type of skis. They were just skating along.
Yeah, skis.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah.
I was jealous. I didn't get to see them up close. They just passed you because you were ahead of us. But
The hard part about that downhill was you have to get at least 1 foot out of the groomed track in order to get your edge to bite enough to slow down. So if you're just going to be in the track, you're just committed for a ride, and it's like a little roller coaster.
No, there was definitely, my knees were not committed for the ride. My knees decided to get out of there.
Yeah.
Like I bent my knees down, you know, I was like, I see people do this on skis, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
So, so we got to camp after filming a whole bunch of videos. You guys got to camp a lot earlier than Tayson or I. And we had it set up pretty soon after I got the skis off. I realized just how deep the snow was. I think, like, in my mind, it wasn't that deep until you're off and only in those, like, ski boots that we rented.
Brigham learned how deep the snow was.
Diving into the snow.
Sure.
I do think we need to talk about what the heck that snow was, because what's interesting about the snow is it had a very light crust on top, but if you broke through the crust, underneath it was like quicksand. Like if you moved your feet, you just go deeper and deeper and deeper and into the snow. And actually in the video, the 41 below freezing video we did on YouTube, there's a lot of people that asked like why I didn't pack snow up against the side of that tent. Well, that's why, is it was the same type of snow where you hold it up and it's just like sand in your hand. So putting that up against the side of my tent would have just blown sand-like snow into my tent and everywhere. But that was not very fun. I was cursing that sand. I almost fell into the fire pit. A few of us almost fell in the fire pit a few times because of this. I don't know.
I just put my head in it.
Yeah, you just dove in there.
But I don't know why you're complaining about the snow. That's the greatest snow on earth. That's Utah.
Whoever came up with that motto?
It's Utah's saying, and it's just because the air is really dry in Utah, so the snow becomes a really fine powder, which is amazing for skiing, but it's not amazing for packing snow around your tent or walking in.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Not for setting up a tent. I should have just kept my skis on. I mean, that was one of the things I was cursing. But when I went down in there and started getting snow
in the boots,
I was like, oh no, I need gaiters. I need them. And Brigham has gaiters that are 12 feet long, and he's digging his pit, and it looks very comfortable. You want to?
Well, the gaiters, not the.
Yeah.
I would have guessed the snow was like 2.5 feet or 3 feet deep where we were. But as Brigham is just digging and digging and digging, I was like, wow, this is a lot deeper.
It's like 4 to 5 feet deep.
Yeah.
I actually would like to hear what Brigham liked on the trip, because I don't think I saw or talked to him the whole time. He was just digging.
I didn't talk to anybody except myself in my hole. No. Yeah.
We better paint the context. The rest of us were using tents.
Yeah.
Brigham was using a hot tent, meaning
It's a floorless tent.
A floorless tent with a titanium stove in there. And so as you light up that titanium stove, it's going to dig through the snow. And so he wanted to get down to the ground to set up his shelter, which seemed like a great idea at first.
Yeah. Well, yeah. When I first got there, my first thought was to stay on top of the snow. I started packing it down, and then as I was took my skis off and was maneuvering around, every once in a while I break through and post hole down to like mid thigh, and so I thought, I don't really want to encounter that, like trying to roll over in my sleep or something, or just getting around inside the tent and eating dinner and stuff. So then I thought I better dig down, because it was likely the heat of the stove would just sink itself down. And so I committed, and then at first I thought I'll just dig down a couple feet to like the next icy layer, and then but it was just a lot more than a couple feet, and I still wasn't to the bottom. So then I was committed. I'm in this giant hole, so then I just didn't want to have a crappy sleeping situation, so I figured the only way to actually do it proper was to just dig all the way down, and it took me several hours.
And for those at home, by the way, it should be on our newest YouTube video. There's some glimpses of Brigham digging his pit to China.
Yeah, you can see. You'll be watching like Tayson set up his tent, but in the background you can see like my little shovel peek out of the hole and throw a load of
See his head
snow
pop
in the
up every
background.
once in a while.
So was it worth it? Was that awesome titanium stove functional and
It was cozy. I mean, it was definitely cozy. You got
no
your
drafts down in there?
Didn't have any drafts, no.
Any oxygen down there for your...
I still could breathe. No, it was good. In the end, I slept pretty well.
You said that you were going to sleep well for one of two reasons.
Yeah.
What are those two reasons?
When you dig that big of a hole, you'll either be tired enough that you'll sleep well no matter what, or you'll sleep well because you prepared a nice tent site. So
which did you experience?
either.
Either and both?
I slept pretty well.
Was that the same Seek outside stove, or is it a different stove?
So, yeah, same way.
Yeah. Okay. How was your guys' night, Derek, Tyler?
Well, Maddie and we shared a 2-person tent, and so we got in there. We actually didn't immediately remove our skis, because I figured as soon as I step off of that thing, I'm going to go straight down to through the snow. So we actually started stomping around with them in like a kind of a crisscross pattern with our skis and jumped. I was kind of jumping on my skis. Is how hard I had to pack or do it to get through that crust that Tayson mentioned. But that actually worked really well. We set up a 2-person tent, trekking pole tent on top of the snow. Just used my same trekking poles that I had been skiing with. And I grabbed a few dead branches from a nearby dead tree and used those as stakes. And actually that worked really well because I didn't have to worry about trying to pack in the snow around, flimsy tiny little stakes where they'd probably just come out of that really fine snow really easy. I actually just shoved a 3-foot long stick all the way down into the snow and was able to pitch a tent that way, and those sticks didn't budge. So that's what we did, and we were actually really comfortable on our pads, and we had Summit sleeping bags. I had a 0 degree, Maddie had -15. And overall, we stayed pretty warm. The one thing that we did that I was actually really glad I've done, I never tried this before personally. I've always been comfortable enough just with a sleeping bag and whatever layers I'm wearing. So I never tried to actually boil water and put it in an Nalgene bottle to shove kind of in the bottom of my sleeping bag. But I did that for Maddie because I was like, well, this is her first time. I want her to keep coming with me even in the winter. I know she will in the spring and summer, but I want to do this all year. So I wanted to make sure she was extra warm. So I boiled that and shoved that Nalgene bottle down inside her sleeping bag. And that worked awesome, actually. Up until about 5 in the morning, from like 9 p.m. to 5, it was warm. It was a warm bottle, just kind of a heater down there for her. So, Tayson has talked about that a few times. You'll probably hear that if you go back in other podcasts. So I'm like, never tried it, but it actually is true. That is a second, stamp of approval on that method. Keep your feet warm.
Yeah, I wish I had done the same thing.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda. It's crazy. Like I remember when I first heard about that, I didn't believe that it would stay warm that long. I thought if you like people that did that, it would stay warm for an hour or maybe or something like that. But no, it'll stay warm for a long time. Kind of the same thing of like water can hold heat or just its temperature really well. Even if you're out there and you don't want your water to freeze, sometimes what you can do is just bury it in the snow. And the snow acts as an insulator and it'll not freeze, which seems backwards. But by burying your water in the snow, you can oftentimes keep it from freezing if you were to just put it in your tent vestibule or something. But yeah, water can hold onto it. I mean, it's very stable and good at holding on to whatever. It's cold or heat or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I don't know if we've mentioned this already, but I think we better, just to give some context. At that night, it got down to, I think, about 4 degrees. Is that right?
It was forecast for like 9, but it definitely felt like it was getting cold fast.
The temperature reading we got was 5, and someone else told us that morning that their car said 4 or 3 at the parking lot. So it was
right around
cold. Fahrenheit, right? So you're well below freezing or 0 in Celsius.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, when we left, when we got on the skis around 1 in the afternoon, it was 30 degrees.
Yeah.
In full sunlight. So as soon as we got camp set up and the sun set, it got quite cold very quickly.
Yeah, we attempted a fire.
We had a fire.
It was there.
Yeah.
Tyler worked hard and got a fire up and rolling.
Tayson didn't believe in it, so he tried to put it out.
I fell in the quicksand snow and did put it out at one point.
Kicked all the snow into
which
the fire.
was a disaster.
Well, and the fire kept sinking in the snow.
And then not breathing.
Yeah, so it was a lot of work for what fire we had.
Yeah,
but we had one.
It was a fire that worked long enough for us to all have dinner around the fire, I guess.
Except for Brigham, he was still digging.
Brigham was still digging. Well into the dark. He was digging away.
I think it was. I think we can give it a little more credit. That fire was there long enough to keep all of our feet warm too.
Warmed up our feet.
It was nice actually for sticking your feet kind of close to that fire hole, and my boots were nice and toasty by the time I went straight to my tent. My feet were not cold, so
I definitely got because those boots had such a shallow, like they were like barely classified as mids. I would feel like a mid boot.
Yeah, they're like
it was
7
really
inches.
hard to keep the snow out of them without gaiters. Typically, I just use the Sawtooth Pants gaiter system, built-in gaiter system, and that works really well for me with my snow boots. But they have a much taller, top on them. So those things, I got snow down the back of those boots, and then it just caked in there. And so my feet, I'd have to put them right on top of the fire. I'd get them warm, and then if I did anything, they'd just get cold again until I got into my tent. So between that and, I had a good dinner and had some good snacks, and we fought the fire quite a bit, but the smoke was everywhere. I don't know how this is probably the worst fire I've ever seen for the smoke just being in everyone's faces at all times. And it took days. I could smell smoke for like 4 days after. Like it was that caked in my nose hairs or something. I don't know, but it was insane. Yeah, it took 2 showers, I think, to get it off of my exterior, but I could still smell it. That was the most intense smoky fire I've had in a long time.
Those boots were the reason why the trip is not a positive in my mind. I really all I'm going through is like the things that I learned off of this trip. I haven't done a real winter trip in years. So like there were things like, I want gaiters. I want better winter boots for this situation. I don't want to just like assume the ski people have like these, like the boots felt fine when they were there, but
on the skis
they were not insulated enough. And I had my feet took hours to get warm when I finally got into my sleeping bag, which, I took a -15 Summit. Great bag, probably my favorite bag that we have here.
My favorite.
It's like, y'all can take your TopQuilts, y'all can take all that stuff. I'm gonna get that -15 Summit.
Joe is one
nice
of the
and
guys
warm
in the office that also when he's cold, he's cold.
I run
and
cold.
so he you can see him fairly regularly running around different parts of the office, wearing some jacket or coat, and that's pretty normal.
In fairness to Joe, so it doesn't sound like we're just sitting here railing on Joe and that he's just got horrible judgment. What Joe doesn't have is a lot of experience. So a lot of the stuff that comes intuitive to us does not enter Joe's mind. So, while the rest of us had the same boots, pretty much, like Joe really struggled with his feet because there's certain things that Joe just doesn't know that don't enter his mind, like you have to be constantly moving, or if you're going to go to bed and your feet are cold, you have to warm your feet up, and the only way to do that is to move your feet, to walk around, start pumping blood, generate body heat. So,
or the Nalgene.
So the fact that you had cold feet, Joe, it's It's okay. It's not because you're inferior or anything like that. But now you do have a body of experience, one experience that you can refer back on, because you're definitely not going to want that to happen again.
No.
I think all of us had cold feet actually at some point. That was everybody. I think one thing that maybe could possibly be different though was that, Joe, you didn't really stay up for our fire too much.
No, I was getting cold. It was starting at my feet, but it was going everywhere.
To me, that was
Well,
that was the number one easiest way for me to warm up my feet, because my feet were just cold as well after setting up camp, walking around. I was trying to take pictures of things or film a couple things as well, but by the time I actually got to the fire and started heating up dinner, my feet were like ice. But sticking them kind of closer to the fire where it was close enough that I could warm them up, it eventually did heat them up to where I was like, wow, not only are my feet not cold, they're actually like really warm. And at that point, then I was okay going to bed, because I kept Maddie as well. Like, we can't go to bed until your feet are warm. So I kept asking her, your feet warm yet? And when they were, I'm like, okay, now we can go to bed whenever you want, but we're not going to bed any sooner. And I think that's one thing that, kind of Brigham's talking about is, you realize, if I go to bed now and my feet are cold, it's just going to be harder to warm them up in my tent, because there's only so much moving around you can do in your tent. And that, for me, that's kind of the big thing. I got to either run around and really get a workout going, or I'm not going to bed because I'll just be cold and won't go to sleep anyway. So,
yeah, in general, I just have cold, clammy feet. That's just like my default mode too. So I don't know.
You switch socks in your tent?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And you had down
About
booties.
two pairs of socks, down booties probably save my feet.
So I did an interesting test actually. I forgot to tell you guys about this, but I had 2 tests going on when I got into the tent. I made sure to get my feet really warm before I went, but then Tayson stepped on the fire. I was like, I'm not waiting for the fire to get fixed. I'm warm. I'm just going to go to bed. So I went in there and...
You're welcome, by the way.
Yeah. So my first test was because I had sat on the snow while building the fire and I'd been moving around a bunch, my butt got wet like all the way through all 3 layers. My underwear, my Dragonwool, and my pants were completely soaked through. So I knew that. I was like, okay, it's a negative 15 degree sleeping bag. I'm plenty warm. I should be able to get these 3 layers to dry while I'm sleeping. And most of the time I've been kind of lacking confidence in drying clothes when getting into the sleeping bag. So usually I would strip down and not have as much on. But I was like, these should dry. This is a really warm sleeping bag. So that was test number 1. Test number 2 was I wanted to test the dry socks before bed theory. And so I had 2 pairs of wool socks. I had the wool socks that I was wearing while we skied, and then I had a fresh pair of wool socks, but they were really cold wool socks from being in my pack, So I was like, okay, I'm going to leave one wool sock on that I've had on all day, and I'm going to put one sock on the other foot that's cold but totally dry. And because, a lot of times, like we just asked Joe, did you change your socks at the end? When I went to bed, it took a little while for my feet to be really toasty warm, but there was no difference between one sock or the other. No difference. Wool is wool, and it insulates whether it's wet or dry. So that was a good one for me to test that out. But then all 3 of my layers, my pants, thermals, and underwear, were dry by about 11, which was pretty good. So.
Yeah, I've had a lot of confidence in being able to dry out clothes by just wearing them to bed. So I almost always, if I have
when we were
clothes,
in Beaver, you just had
He's climbed in soaking wet.
Yeah, from being soaked all day long, you're like, I'm just getting in with all my stuff. I'm like, jeez. All right.
Wow.
But I was dry by the morning. It worked.
Yeah.
It does. So I'm like, this is just the best way to do it because I don't want to feel this wet in the morning. So
yeah.
I like to have nice, warm dry skin.
So-
And I'll keep the wet clothes in the bag somewhere if I need to, but I want dry clothes touching my skin wherever possible.
Yeah. So
My
did
feet
you have
get
wool
really
socks?
clammy and cold, and so I do like to switch mine. But I go as far as when I switch my wool socks, I actually let them air out for a second. I kind of like rub my hands on them until I can feel they're not damp anymore, and then I put my wool socks on because my feet they sweat or get damp, and then even if I just switch the socks super fast, like there's still moisture on my feet, and so it kind of like freeze them for a half a second, trying to get some airflow around them, get them dried out, and then I'll put the second set on. But
Yeah.
that's always been the way I've done it. I like nice dry layers.
Speaking of staying dry, we did have the 1/8 foam pads, 1/8 inch foam pads that we all brought. Probably helped us from getting hypothermia, let's say. That night. Actually, it was really nice. It was really nice to take those 1/8 inch foam pads by the fire and be able to put that down on the ground, get your butt wet, and also not have to trek in a chair, basically. So these are something that we now sell here at Outdoor Vitals, and that's what this episode is brought to you by. They are great for layering. Once again, using as a seat. We have a short version that's 1.5 ounces and a regular that's 2.5 ounces, I think. Do you want to talk about like in a winter situation like this, what the 1/8 inch foam pads are used for?
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, they're not actually designed for a winter scenario like this. It's probably better off to have a slightly thicker closed-up foam pad, depending on your sleeping mat, right? So if your sleeping mat is a 3-season mat, like a 3 to 4 R value, you're kind of pushing the limits on them. But what they still allow you to do is keep all your gear out of the snow. They allow you to sit on something that's not snow, keep dry. It's in the wintertime, it's way easier to stay dry than it is to dry out. In the summer, when you got the sun, it's out longer, it's hot, you can dry things out really quickly. In the winter, keep things as dry as you possibly can because it's way harder to dry things out, and they really do help for that. But yeah, if you go back in a lot of our footage through the whole year, you'll see most of us using those throughout the entire year, and they've been a massive game changer for me. And just being able to stretch out, lay down on the ground, do some yoga, triple them up, and have a super comfy thick pad when I just want like a little square. I put them under my sleeping mat every single night, which helps them not slide around. It offers protection from underneath, and it offers a little bit extra R value, like a half R value. So they're just a massive staple, and you can crunch them up into basically any size or however you want to pack them, which is very helpful as well. So
yeah, they're a multi-purpose tool, really. I wouldn't think of them as a sleeping pad. That's just kind of one of the functions you can use them as, because they're inexpensive, they're really lightweight, and they're really versatile. You can make multiple uses out of them.
Well, I just imagine, because our pad is not a high R value pad like the one that we have currently.
Not a winter pad.
We have things under development, but the one that we have, our standard pad, is not made for that. But yet, with that pad and with the 1/8 inch foam pads, I had a short and a regular that I stacked on top of each other. It was enough. It was enough to keep me from, I was able to sleep after my feet had.
Well, I think this would be an interesting talking point. Let's see if me and Brigham touched on this. We were just traveling together for the last couple of days, and I believe that even though, like I asked you, I've kind of trained all you guys to be like, well, were you getting cold from underneath? Was your pad making you cold? And you kind of have learned to pay attention to that. But I think it's still very hard to fully grasp. Like, you might not feel cold, but it can still be pulling heat out of you. So take into consideration, you slept in a negative 15-degree bag. Tyler's in a negative 15-degree bag. Derek was in a 0-degree bag. Brigham was in a 15-degree bag. So a positive 15-degree bag. But he had a different pad that is warmer, and he slept what sounds like warmer than most of the people in camp.
But he also had a hot stove.
That was not on when I was asleep.
That's fair.
As soon as those go out, unless you've got really good cold base.
The stove does not heat up the tent when you're asleep. So the stove was off when I went to sleep, and the stove doesn't provide any warmth while you're sleeping.
But what you did have was probably a little bit less cool airflow under you since you were down in a hole versus us being right up on the surface.
I think that for sure helped. And so, yeah, so I wanted to use a 15-degree bag just to really see, test its limits. But keeping in mind, that doesn't mean that I'm like going to go about it carelessly or recklessly. I still slept in a Nova Pro jacket and, with the hood on. And so I didn't do anything different on my lower half, but on the upper half I had a Nova Pro jacket on. And yeah, it was plenty warm.
That is an interesting point because I also slept in my Nova Pro that night in a 0-degree bag. And I was warm, but I doubt I would have been as warm without that Nova Pro. And I did not have a winter sleeping pad. So, that is definitely an interesting thing.
I took my Nova off, but I put it around my butt because I'm a side sleeper. And that'll crush the insulation, basically, if you're rolling around like that. If you're talking about the pads underneath you, I didn't start feeling that until about 6 a.m. And that's when it was really like.
But I think I began to develop over a body of experience in using a bunch of different pads is that there's a difference between a pad keeping you warm, a pad keeping you neutral, and a pad like noticeably keeping you cold, let's say. I think a lot of you guys are sitting between like noticeably keeping you cold and neutral. So it's like slowly draining, but it's not enough to really tell.
Yeah, there's also a difference between feeling it and it actually happening. By the time you start feeling it, it's been happening. That means like it's slowly and gradually. It's the reverse of boiling a frog, right? It's the same thing. It's just slowly sucking the heat out, and then once you start noticing it, you're to the point where it's way harder to actually reverse it now.
So I think all this being said, what I would answer to all of these things is we are developing a pad that's going to be significantly warmer than our current pad. But the pad that we've even got under development is still going to be very much a 3-season pad. Yes, you can layer it, you can use it into the winter, but be very conscious of the R value of a pad. We have a video we released over a year ago talking about, it's like titled 80% of backpackers sleep cold because of this. And it's got a bunch of views, like 100,000 plus views. But that is like one of the biggest takeaways I think people could learn from is really know what your pad is and what it is not. And just like Brigham mentioned, like by the time you think your pad is getting you cold, it's already been sucking heat out of you for a while. So it's something to pay attention to, especially in those winter seasons. Just gets magnified.
All right, well, Tayson, we had the video just released. You want to tell us about your night?
Awesome.
This is why he's so focused on pads.
I'm not hyper-focusing on pads. So life was good. I skied in. It was great. Had a good dinner. That was great. Went into my tent, and I noticed that the pad was soft. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Hopefully it just kind of the fabric stretched out in cold air. So I opened it up, and I blew air into it. And as soon as I was done, I could hear noise coming out of the valve. But may even back up a little bit. When I popped the valve open, when I blew it up before that, there was glue all over the valve. And I was a little nervous because that pad has been tested a few times here by a different number of people. And then we sent it off to get R value tested at a university. And this was the first time we'd gotten it back from the university. So while the university had it, they had put glue on the valve. So it must have been leaking from previous people using it or the valve or something. And their way of quickly fixing it was to slap glue around the valve, close it up, test the pad, send it back to us. And when they glued it, they had actually got glue on the inner valve, and I could not get it to seal. So first I was blowing it up, and I could hear a little bit, and then I'd put the cap on it and be like, well, hopefully that'll hold it. And I'd kind of wait, and I'd slowly lose air, and then I'd open it up and blow it, and it became an issue really quick because in a scenario like this, no amount of insulation, down, whatever is going to keep you warm laying on the snow. Down's going to collapse. It's not going to insulate, and it's just going to suck the heat out of you all night long. And so I kind of had to start making some tough decisions. I had a few good moments in there. Had some good snacks, had a hot drink, while I'm playing around with all this. But no, it was pretty much from 8 p.m., 8 o'clock till about 11 o'clock, I was in pad repair mode. So I was trying different things with the pad valve, and then it came to the point where I decided I've got to get even more committed, and I took out my tenacious tape repair kit, and I blew the pad up as hard as I possibly could, put the valve on it, and then glued everything about the valve, and tried to seal it that way. It takes hours for that stuff to cure, so I laid on my 1/8 inch foam. In normal temperatures. So I laid on my 1/8 inch foam pad for an hour while I was watching some Netflix and drinking some hot cocoa. Actually, I didn't drink hot cocoa. No, I didn't have a hot drink because I was too scared that if I drink the sleepy chai, if I had to walk out, I was going to be all sleepy. So I boiled water and put it in my bag just preemptively, like planning on staying the night, getting it to work. I was blowing on the valve a ton, trying to get it to cure because it takes 8 to 10 hours to cure. And anyways, after an hour, it looked good enough. It wasn't sticky anymore, but it was like noticeably flat. And so then I climbed on it, and more or less instantly my butt was hitting the ground. And I kind of laid on it different ways, trying to get it to work. And it became pretty apparent pretty quick that it wasn't going to work. I popped the valve back open, and then it was all downhill from there. There was no saving it. So basically, by the time all of this pad repair and stuff had been going on, it was about 11 p.m. at night when I realized I got no option but to hike out of here or have a a sufferfest of a night where I'd just be rolling over constantly, trying to keep the side that's on the bottom snow side that's freezing, roll over, freeze the other side while I warm that side up, and it would have been a miserable night. And so I decided to hike out at 11 o'clock at night.
Our fearless leader.
I abandoned that. I think Joe's a little bitter because I debated for a while. I asked Tyler, I'm like, do you think I should go talk to Joe? He went in the bed pretty cold. I want him, maybe he wants to hike out with me. I don't know. And
I would have gone.
I look over at his tent, and it looks like he's asleep, no lights on, no movement, no noise. And I'm like, all right, I'll just let him sleep peacefully in there, which you were, right?
I didn't go to sleep till 2 a.m.
Joe was over there chuckling, watching his show.
I could hear him.
Yeah,
I could hear him laughing.
Joe's having a great time. He's happy, comfortable.
I didn't think hiking out was an option, so I just had to go with it. No, my feet warmed up at about 11:30 at night. And I'd gone to bed at 7:38. The sun had
Or
just
7. It was because I went to
It was
bed at
pretty
8,
early.
and these guys were getting after me for going to bed early.
Yeah. So 4 hours of hell followed by, I was listening to some funny podcasts and I was having a good time. I couldn't go to sleep though because I was the adrenaline from having to keep my feet warm or trying to warm up my feet while I was in the bag was.
Well, I just wish that I had a camera running when we all poked our heads out in the morning, when the sun comes over the mountain. We all kind of hung out in our tents waiting for some direct sunlight, knowing that the tents were going to be frozen and crappy to take down and stuff. So as the sun's coming over, I'm watching the sun come up through the one vestibule, and I look out the other vestibule, and Joe pokes his head out, and Brigham is standing up. And I was like, "Did you guys hear Tayson leave?" And they're like, "What?" And Joe's like, "I can't believe he left." His face, I wish I would have gotten on camera because it was so funny. Just him thinking, "What the heck?"
Well, we were filming a video that was I'm going to survive this in summer gear or whatever. It was 3-season gear for winter. And so that was the extra surprise there. Is that oh wow, we really failed at that.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting.
No one knew that you left.
I know. If I would have got back, what did you say, 15 minutes earlier?
Yeah, if you would have got back 15 minutes earlier, you would have been there before I could tell everyone.
Yeah, Maddie and I got up literally about 15 minutes before you started rolling in because we were just walking around at that point, and then you come strolling what?
Yeah, so I think it would be interesting. I want to back up just for a second. One, I want to back up and say, Joe, I do think your feet were higher than your head. And I personally, as a guy with poor circulation, all that, have found that that's a big deal. I take my water bottle now, I'll lay it on my pad, and if I can see that the water is tilted to one direction, I know. And even a little bit, I have personally found that that can limit circulation and cause cold feet. So one more tip to throw in your arsenal.
Yeah.
I especially find that when I've hammock camped. That's like exponentially worse. But no. So I think that it's a really good question, because I think you could pose a question of like, did this trip fail, right? Or like, what's the worst case scenario? Most people, like, they get so freaked out about like, man, what if this happened? What if this happened? What if this happened? Well, that's exactly what this trip was. Like, the worst thing happened. And really, when you're thinking about it, unless you're in crazy backcountry Alaska or in some other crazy places, most of the time you could put your gear on and you could hike out of there. Is it going to be a long night? Yeah, it's going to be a long night. But moving, you're building body heat, as long as, and so on and so forth. And so that was like a worst case scenario. And really, I had a great ski out. Like, I really did. Like, I was like 20 minutes into the ski out and I was warm. I turned my headlamp off and I was skiing with nothing but moonlight. That hill that you wrecked on, I just committed. I went down that with no headlight. I just got on the tracks and I just let it take me down the hill, went whipping down through the shadows, couldn't see my feet, just committed. And but it was a great ski out. And it's like, that's worst case scenario, guys. That's the worst case scenario in this situation, not every situation. There's been scenarios where, like when we were on Highline, for instance, that would have been a much harder, more miserable walkout, right? Yeah. In the middle of the night. We're in the middle of a wilderness zone, 12 miles to the nearest trailhead, which is in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. But still, like, there's options. And I think that's something that is a good takeaway from this of, like, one, your gear should never fail like this. You should test your gear before. That's a big lesson. Like, I should have blown that pad up before I ever left. It had touched way too many hands before I had used it last. And you should always know your gear in that way. Two, I also think that in most situations, like, you could have patched the pad. That was like, I don't know how you get glue on a valve. I mean, that's a pretty rare thing, and it just would not seal because it had that extra bubble of stuff on the valve. But like in a situation, the worst case scenario, like, you still have options, and don't be so terrified, I guess, of some of that stuff, because I don't know, like, the hike out really wasn't bad, and I did not get a lot of sleep because I hiked out and then I actually ended up driving home, and then I drove back up the next morning, and so I got about 4 hours of sleep that night. But like, that was the worst case of all of it. 4 hours of sleep instead of 8 hours of sleep or something, But
when I heard you ski back in the middle of the night, I was freaking jealous, man, because of the moonlight.
Yeah.
Like, because I would have loved to ski, like, go for like a moonlight ski. Like, I love being out in the moonlight, especially in the wintertime when everything is just glowing. And
yeah, just all reflects
awesome.
around.
I was jealous.
Before heading to bed, I was actually just pausing a little while just to look at the stars. The moon hadn't come up when we were all heading to our tents and stuff, but the stars were amazing this time of year. And yeah, I agree. When Maddie we both woke up at somewhere around, we were both awake at 5. And the moon was still up. It was still really dark. And she suggested, hey, well, why don't we just get up and go ski around? And I wish I would have taken her up on that. I didn't know if she was serious. As her first time, like, are you just saying that? Or are you, like, just teasing? So I didn't really act. But I wish we did, because that would have been phenomenal time to go enjoy.
Your body puts off a lot of heat when you're moving, right? Like, we talked about hypothermic drills and stuff like that. And one of the protocols for the military is to just put on all the clothes you have and just start walking, just start hiking.
Even if they're soaked.
Even if they're soaking wet. Your body can generate a lot of heat. So, yeah, like, when I got out of my sleeping bag, I got really cold really fast. But within 15 minutes of going down that trail, I was super comfortable. And the rest of the ski was great. So, I don't know if there's more to glean from that, but I, turned around the next morning, came back in, skied in, picked up my gear, finished filming videos with you guys, and went home. But I think there's lessons to learn about checking gear and knowing your gear and stuff like that. But I think it's also just nice to know sometimes that in worst case scenario, like, you still can have options, and it might not be as bad as you possibly think it could be. But
all right, well, guys, feel free to send us your comments, questions about backpacking, cool outdoor stories, or ideas for future episode topics. If we think it will bring value to our audience, we will read it on the show, and you can send them by commenting on our Live Ultralight Podcast YouTube channel, or you can send us an email at liveultralightpodcast@gmail.com. So on last week's episode, or last time's episode, it wasn't last week, about backpacking food, Kimberly commented, as a nurse who backpacks, it's not just the calories, it's the nutrition provided. Of course, we can get through a through hike eating trash, but most all of those hikers will tell you it took months to get their bodies back to a healthy condition. Balance is everything. Just listening to you talk about butter and Fritos made my gallbladder ache. At the very least, trekkers should pack vitamins. There are companies that make nutrition-packed, freeze-dried food. Trail Ready is one of my favorites. I don't know if you guys have ever had that. You can buy a box with 18 gourmet soups. They're full of veggies and legumes. I have the CDT in front of me, so I have these 4 resupply boxes along with the Peak Refuel meals that are really good. Thanks for all the tips. And thank you for the comment, Kimberly. We didn't talk about what we ate.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about your trail diet. but funny she mentioned freeze dryers,
yes, we do have some content coming on freeze dryers. We have a Harvest Right freeze dryer that did its first initial trial run today at the time of recording, and we won't talk about it. But that's good.
I messed it up.
We had a ice cream sandwich.
I unwrapped
explosion.
the ice cream sandwiches, and now there's a lot of ice cream that needs to be cleaned out of the thing.
But that isn't the only thing we put in.
And this isn't helping our case with her comment either. That the first thing we freeze dry is ice cream sandwiches. But there is pineapple and mango in there.
And cheesecake.
And cheesecake and taquitos. So we got a little bit of nutrition in there and some taquitos
and a Big Mac.
Some funny things, but this is just our test run. We'll get serious about good nutrition when it's time to.
We're gonna freeze dry some smoked meats and some other stuff that's gonna be. I'm very excited about
power foods.
But back to Joe.
Back to me. No, back to Brigham.
I think to bring new people on that are like newer to backpacking, we're gonna send them through a Brigham mentorship before they can be fully vested on the.
I'd be happy to. So Joe is very disciplined. He's very disciplined with his.
No carbs.
Or just say your diet.
I'm not that disciplined with my diet. I've gained like 15 pounds in the
last
last 6
except
weeks.
for the fact that your diet, I don't know what the heck your diet is, but you fast forever and then you eat very limited meat and fat-based foods. But so like Joe took a meat stick.
Yeah.
Like, those
giant
2.5
summer sausage?
inch thick by 9 inches long summer sausage.
It's it's like 3,000 calories or something.
And
that.
That's what Joe brought. So
yeah,
is that
literally
this only
chunk of meat and fat ground up and wrapped up in a piece of plastic. So just so you know, like diets in everyday life are great and everything, but you don't really want to do that when you're on the trail.
I don't recommend my diet for other people.
Well, you just don't do your diet when you're backpacking. When you're home, go ahead. But when you need
we've seen extremes though.
Hey,
so
we've been sufficiently chastised by our nurse commenter, and you should take note. And I would agree. Like you can't just be, trying to mess with
we've seen it both ways.
On the trail because you need proper nutrition.
Joe is like kind of doing. It's not keto, but it's kind of like keto, right? You're not really doing carbs and stuff on a daily basis. But you're not eating like a summer sausage only, right? That's like taking your current diet and kind of pushing it to an extreme a little bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't normally just only eat summer sausage.
We've also seen other employees in the past have super extreme diets in the office, but then when they went out on the trail and were burning calories, they decided that they could have nothing but like Sour Patch Kids and soda. we don't recommend either of these. As a company, we don't stand behind that. The best thing is to keep consistent nutrition with how you're already fueling your body, ideally, and tweak it from there in a positive direction, maybe. But
and keep sending your dietary nutrition questions to us because we are experts.
we are
we're all
dietitians and doctors are
Hey,
at this table.
I pack vitamins. I have vitamins when I go.
I know. If she watched the last one, it was actually she's actually I think saying that what we were saying is right because my whole full circle thing is that you can't be calorie positive, so you may as well eat the food you like and get good variety. And I talked about bringing vitamins and my greens drinks on the trail. So,
So in addition to comments, guys, you can leave positive iTunes reviews, and we will read them on the show. And we got one. We got one from Booner Kill. That's the name on iTunes. Great info. Keep it up. Thank you for the 5-star review. Guys, I think that's going to be it for this episode unless someone has something to add. But,
any last words of wisdom?
No, I think it goes back to what Tayson said, like about winter backpacking in general. Whether it's trying cross-country skiing for the first time, or you're on a snowshoe somewhere, or you're just going to get out in the snow and camp out, it's worth trying. It is definitely worth trying, and especially if you're considering the worst-case scenario and you can live with that, then by all means go and give it a shot. Obviously for Tayson, it was a little bit of a fiasco on this last trip, but for my wife and I, we loved it. And for me, that was probably one of my favorite winter backpacking trips yet. I got to be with my wife. We got a cross-country ski, which I think is a blast. And we stayed warm, which I have not been able to say on every winter backpacking trip that I've ever done since, being a kid. So, if you prep right and you have the things that you need, you can have a great time and honestly had a really memorable experiences. And especially like Tayson said earlier, just consider the worst case. If you can live with that, perfect. Go for it and give it a shot, even if it's your first time.
I think for us, a lot of us in the office, we started camping in the winter season naturally because we just camped all year. We build a lot of confidence in our gear and our skill sets and all that. And then you're in the winter and you're just like, man, let's just go do this. I probably would say I don't recommend the first time you ever go backpacking that you do winter backpacking, or if you do it near your car or something like that. But I feel like if you start backpacking or camping all year long, winter backpacking really isn't scary because you just build incremental confidence in all of your gear, all of your skill sets, knowledge, and it just starts compiling to where, people literally think we're crazy sometimes. Like in that 41 below freezing video, it's funny when people approach me that I know that watch that video, they're like, you're freaking crazy. And in my head, I'm like, what was crazy about that video? It doesn't seem crazy to me because there was a moment where it sucked and I almost had to hike out. But I could face that worst case scenario and I know what that looks like and so on and so forth, or just sleeping out in the winter. And I think those incremental levels of building your confidence and expertise and knowledge and comfort with your gear pays dividends to where winter backpacking will not seem like we're some crazy group of people trying to winter backpack. And maybe by next winter, Joe will agree.
there's
I think
some upgrades I need to make to a few things in order to winter backpack properly, I think. But I'm glad I went because I learned a few things.
You will remember that all year, and by next winter, you're going to be an expert.
I will not leave without this, and this.
And it just comes down to your preparation. If you get the chance to go on a trip like this, but you're not totally confident in your gear or yourself, then go do a practice run in a campground or something and kind of hash out whatever things you're not confident in, where there's less risk. There's been a lot of times where if we're going on a trip, I always make sure I did it even before this one. Tayson throws a new tent at me, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna I don't know if I'm gonna be able to set this up in the snow. So I went and set it up at home, and then I was confident in it after that. It's the same for sleeping. If you're gonna sleep in cold weather and you haven't done it, do it in your backyard. I know Tayson's tested tons of product just in the backyard, just trying to get down to whatever temp you're trying to get to or whatever. So it just do the prep and then you can have a good time when you're out.
It's been a long time since I've done a good backyard test. We've been consistent enough on our monthly trips that I have not had to do a backyard test in a while, but that was a regular occurrence in the beginning days. So,
All right, guys. Thank you for listening.